What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Hartness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I am on the mission to find the magic ingredients that make workshops work. Today with me on the show is Colonel Walt, and we speak about his career at the Air Force and how he used his learnings to build a community-led education system. So be ready to be wowed. And by the way, if you don't have pen and paper at hand to take your own notes, scroll down to the show notes to download my free one-page summary. And now, lean back and be inspired. Colonel Walt, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Thank you for joining me today.
It's my pleasure.
Yes. And I am intrigued and curious to learn more about your approach to community-led education and what facilitation has to do with it and what you learned from the Air Force about all of that.
That's 3 questions.
Yes, and we have hopefully more than enough time to explore them. And I always like to start at the beginning. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator? And actually, do you?
The Air Force called me a facilitator because that was a role that I played back in the 1990s when the Air Force was introducing something called total quality management. And it was a different approach where rather than giving soldiers basically orders, hey, do this, very prescriptive, what they wanted to do was to get soldiers to work as teams to solve problems. So as a facilitator, my primary role was to define an objective and then to create the environment where they could work through the problem. And it's a cultural change for the military because it's always, it's structurally a top down, I told you to do this, go do it now type thing, where this was more of, I need this done, get back to me when it gets done. And it was a little different, very different.
And it's fascinating. I wouldn't have expected that. And I wonder what kind of mental shift did you have to facilitate alongside that? Because I would assume that those who are joining the Air Force might expect the top-down approach, and then suddenly they are asked to collaborate and they're asked for their opinion and facilitate it. How did that work?
Well, actually, it's the opposite, because it wasn't a problem with the younger troops. It was a problem with the older, higher-ranking people because they're used to being able to just tell people what to do. So in essence, when I remember going to OTS, which is basically boot camp, it was drummed into us then. Your people under you have every right to question what you're doing, not necessarily as a way to challenge you, what you're saying them to do, but more of a better understanding. And you are obligated to provide an explanation when convenient. So it was something that was beginning to change in the military in the early 1990s. And along with that, which immediately followed the quality management approach, was the Air Force-wide human resource development, which the two together creates a totally different environment, which is something that is a springboard for everything I'm doing now in education.
Can you elaborate on that?
Total quality management is procedural, it's processes, it's like management by objective. It's creating ideas based on a ability to solve a problem or to achieve an objective. So you're looking at structurally step-by-step process in total quality management. Human resource development was more of creating an environment that allowed that to happen, creating an environment where individuals could work as teams, could be recognized for their contributions, to be able to create environments where people had equal opportunity to progress through the ranks. Those kind of things working together created a different environment, which is actually very interesting, which my book actually explains, called Lead from the Middle, Lead from Behind, and the early years in the military and what that went through. I was a commander at the time, and I was able to apply it to a squadron that I had just inherited of almost 200 people. And it was recognized as being in U.S. Congress as being a poor example of reserve unit. This is the Air Force Reserve. And in 4 months, we turned it around. We created an environment where everyone's opinions were met. People felt as though they were a part of something as a unit. And it became more cohesive in a way that it's hard to explain it because it's actually an entire chapter in the book of how we made this transition. And
And
it's a very interesting model.
I am intrigued. And what comes to my mind is this is the situation that any organization and any change manager dreams of, right? To change an entire organization from poor performing to thriving by inducing a new way of structure, autonomy, responsibility, and collaboration. And I wondered to what extent the challenge you initially mentioned, that the older guys didn't like that because they were used to the command and control, whether this actually made it possible to introduce the change, because you could basically top down say, okay, this is now the new approach we are taking.
It was interesting. It was never a thing of like, okay, I'll give you an example. For one of those new approaches we're taking, it was the introduction of our 5 levels of achievement, which basically leveled the playing field for a lot of people who probably were not going to get promoted in the old system. And what it allowed was for us to create, this is the criteria. This is what we're going to use to evaluate everybody in their performance, on top of all the things I had mentioned a minute ago, so that we had a criteria where people understood their roles, understood how they could participate, and understood how they would be evaluated from it. And it was a whole lot of pieces that needed to be put in place that changed it from a duty station, a requirement to just show up, to being a part of a unit and being a proud member of that unit. There was a whole lot of things that had to happen for that mindset to change. I appreciate your question. That was the interesting part. And when I mentioned before about how getting the leadership to buy in, the book is dedicated to my two top enlisted leaders of the squadron, because they took that on as a role and diminished their authority in a lot of ways, but at the same time, embracing what we were trying to do in quality management and human resource development.
How did you get their buy-in? What was in for them?
I was lucky because I just got 2 people who bought in before it started. They were part of the whole unit's, the whole wing's efforts in this area. So although we had never worked together, we had attended meetings where we discussed things about the Air Force. Where we took it was someplace else. It was just the 5 levels of achievement was just a shining example of something that we could do that was just not done anyplace else in the entire United States Air Force.
And so I would be curious about the 5 levels of achievement. So what are we talking about? And then what was in for them? Because I think that's always the big question we ask. How do we get the leadership to buy into such a big change, especially if they're losing authority?
Well, they were losing authority. They were. Actually, I'll explain why. The instant buy-in for the 5 levels of achievement was, in formation, I told everybody that if you reach and maintain level 5, I will do everything I can to get you promoted. So it became okay, here's another program that's coming out, and then suddenly someone who was having a very hard time getting promoted went through it. They did level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5. And then as soon as they got level 5, I promoted a master sergeant. And everybody saw that. Oh, so it was interesting.
So what I hear, and I find this brilliant, is that it's the transparency of the of the structure to be promoted, and a promotion scheme, the 5 levels, that is aligned with the actual cultural outcomes you want to see. Because
operational outcomes. Yes.
Pardon me?
And the operational outcomes. The 5 levels of achievement are written to be able to achieve our major objectives as a military unit. So they're married to what we're trying to do. It wasn't just 5 levels of you can just do this. It was everything that you're doing to reach the different levels, you are contributing to us, our mission.
And I guess the culture. And that's why it then became a consistent system.
Yes, exactly right. It from the bottom up at that point. Yeah. I could not stop it once it started if I wanted to. It was everybody at the bottom was saying, hey, this is my opportunity. And they maintained it. I didn't have to figure it out anymore. You know what I mean? I didn't have to guard it. because
It's
they saw it.
interesting. Yeah. So I'm a behavioral economist, right? And I wrote my PhD thesis on self-enforcing contracts. So how can we make sure that everyone would agree to a contract and stick to it, although there is no formal enforcement? And what you're describing is exactly that. So how can you create a format that everyone wants to buy in and thereby contribute to the common goal and to the common culture by design?
It's funny because as this goes on and I explain this to you, you're going to be surprised at how simple it is.
So tell me about the 5 levels of achievement.
Okay.
I promise that I won't tell it anyone.
Well, actually, I forgot about the 5 levels of achievements were all the things that we had to do that weren't being done well, such as discipline. So making sure that no one had any disciplinary problems. Training requirements, making sure that your training was up to date. And if you were a trainer for subordinates who were your trainees, you had to make sure that every one of their training requirements were on time. And those were the metrics that we used in the squadron. They're the ones we followed. I didn't have to follow the big metrics of being able to achieve our objectives. All I had to do was follow the small metrics of making sure that everyone in the unit had what they needed to succeed in what they had to do.
How can we support each other?
And
making them responsible of the achievements and the wins of the others, the victories.
It became. I give an example. It was something like a missed training event was one of those things I had to brief every week, every month when we met to my superiors. And before, just like, I have 5 overdue training actions, and that's the way it used to be. Once this implemented, before I went to my meeting, everybody in the squadron knew how many overdues we had and who had those overdues. It was total transparency.
Mm.
And everybody became a part of it. Everybody understood. So that suddenly, because we had an open position that could be filled by someone, it didn't just go to anybody. Suddenly we had a wall of metrics that we could say, okay, well, this person belongs in that position, and they moved to that position and then got promoted when the next cycle came around. So it was accountability on our end. That was the hard part for the old timers
was
in
about
the military.
To ask.
Suddenly there's a level of accountability that they never had before. They didn't have that, so it was a very, very good transition for them. And they used to like it. They used to enjoy the fact that they can compete with other supervisors in the amount of their people who were missing training actions or waiting actions or whatever it may be. And it became a different game, a different thing to look at.
And I like how you phrase it, that it has suddenly this competitive, almost gamified approach. And I wonder to what extent there might also be pushback, because especially when I think of the corporate world, more transparency, numbers suddenly also puts pressure on those in the leadership that, now everyone can be promoted to my level and everyone can see what I'm actually doing and performing. So there's also a threatening component in that.
So there was none. And the reasons were part of the methods that we used to implement it. I'll give an example. I had a company once. I was a consultant as well for companies. And I had a company, Tampa Bay Workforce Alliance, where talking to the president and vice president one time in a casual meeting, they just said, we need to get our people more involved in things to get them working as teams of projects, for projects. So it's project management. So we created a planning application that allows us to create teams for projects. We created I guess it would be a glossary of terms that suddenly became common that everyone relied upon. So everyone's talking the same language, such as, if you're going to do some sort of analysis, what is the baseline? What is the trend analysis over the last 3 to 5 years? Feasibility studies, needs analysis, data capture and things, all these things that are management skill sets became defined as the outcomes of the projects that they were involved in. So all I had to do was list these outcomes, and from the completion of the outcomes, the project was done.
Yeah. And what do you think are the key components that make the implementation of such a radical shift possible?
It has to start, it's only one thing, which has been a problem in community-based education, is it starts with a plan. You know, and if you look at a lot of times when things are done in a community, a small community, it's usually somebody's idea. It's usually something that is already figured out that needs to get done. You know, somebody from above is going to say, the community needs to do this, where it will never work. What you have to have is a strategic plan, locally driven by those who will be impacted. Now you have what's a listing of the needs of the community. And now you develop those plans and projects I just talked about around addressing and solving those problems and needs. And that's how you get the community involved immediately.
And then something that I wanted to come back anyway, but I think now is a perfect moment to come back to that. You mentioned your book that is called Leading from the Middle and the Back.
No, lead from the middle, lead from behind.
Exactly. It does not say lead from the front.
That's it. That's lead from the
So what I'm hearing now is that the project with the Air Force and with the community-based education, as far as I understand it, need to have a component of the leading from the middle or the back, as opposed to the leading from the front, where you tell people what to do?
Well, there are times you need that too. I will give you one good example of this. In the military, you get a chance to go to different units and you have different leadership responsibilities. In other words, you go this unit, suddenly you're managing this organization, you go this organization. When I go into a unit, the first thing I look at is how the strength of the enlisted and leadership that is there already. And we had just talked about this a minute ago. Let's just say that your unit that you're coming in is in total disarray. Everybody's arguing with everybody. Everybody is they're not cooperating. Then you leave from the front and you create an environment that requires them to work together to solve your issues. What do you want? You want this, and this, and they have to unite to get it to you.
Is this what we know from the army movies, where you have the colonel who breaks the team to make them obey?
This could be any corporate environment as well. When you walk in and your unit's in disarray, what you do is you unite everybody else against you. That's all you're doing. You're basically saying everybody here is fighting among themselves, whatever it may be. That's because there's no focus. You're now the focus. You come in and this is what you want. And you make it as demanding as you can make it. And you create that environment where now they have to figure out how they're going to satisfy what you're looking for. So we're going into units that were poorly managed. That's how I went in, saying that I need to basically create a total vision of what I want in this unit, and then to create a pathway where every person in the unit has the ability to contribute to my end.
That is so sneaky and so brilliant. So basically, once you are stronger than all of them, and then they unite and have a common enemy, in air quotes.
Me, I'm the common enemy.
And this, and this requires so much. You need to have a backbone, and you have to leave your ego at the side to step into the position where you know intentionally that it's for the best of the team to be disliked.
I remember I taught in high school, junior ROTC program. And we really focused on projects for the kids to get involved in. And I created a document where from a single sheet of paper, I can create an entire project with a project manager, project leaders, team members, all on one sheet that could have 2, 3, 4, 5 different objectives. And every one of those objectives is led by a team leader who's going to complete it. So it's really mapped out real well as to what the kids are supposed to do. Okay. So it was interesting because when they used to see them in my hand, the kids used to like, oh, I want to be the one. Give it to me, so they could be the project leader. Right. So what I would do is I would explain what the project is, and then I would give it to somebody. And I would say to them, suddenly you are the most knowledgeable person of this project than anybody else in this room. Tell me why. The reason why they're the most knowledgeable is because they're the only ones that know what they want to do. Everybody else now has to follow and figure out what they want to do. That's what makes them the most knowledgeable.
Mm.
And from that starting point, you begin to create the teams around that person. But it's a natural process. When somebody understands the objective, understands the skill sets or the tools that they'll have at their disposal to get it, it's a management capability that a lot of our kids have. Everybody has to some extent, but it's always mixed up in things like, personalities or methods or whatever it may be. It doesn't have to be any of that. So what we create is an opportunity for the kids to erase all the other things that would be distractions, make it a pure objectives. This is your team, and they will usually get through it pretty well. I usually one example of that real quick if I can. In 1989, I wrote a application called Wall Street Whiz, which is an economics education program that teaches kids about stock market investing. The project itself, or the program itself, is you participate as a weekly investor from April 1st, 1929 to March 31st, 1930, on the actual stock market of the United States. And you're buying and selling 12 different stocks, which is throughout the industry, from Pillsbury to AT&T to American Agriculture, International Harvest, I'm sorry, things like that. So it's a way for the kids to now understand how to make investment choices from the small listing of articles that I would condense, that they would read, figure out what happened that week, purchase or sell the stocks they want to buy, and then the following week they would see what happened. Okay. So suddenly, when I presented this to teachers, everyone said, "Oh, the vocabulary is too much for them. They won't understand it. They won't get this part or that part." They got it phonetically. They understood. If there is a margin call, the stock's going to go down in a few days. But they understood how the market was going to react based on what is going to happen in the market, such as I said, margin call a minute ago, when dividends are paid, all different types of things, when a company is taken over by another, when
political decisions. Yeah.
And the funny thing about it was that kids who played this and played the first time in a group against adults who this was their job, they always won.
And I
always won.
Yes, I am not, and I'm not surprised because, well, now with algorithms investing, it's a different story. But back then, it was trust. Trust defines the stock market. Do you trust a certain company to attract more funds? Yes or no?
It's a lot of this. There's a lot of things like world events, the economy itself. There's a whole lot of factors that are part of this that I was surprised the kids loved it. And the reason I had brought that as the example is because many things that we do are games. I mean, that stock market is a game. It's fun. And the process, there are kids who never read, will play a game for like 4 hours and read a novel.
Yeah.
They didn't realize they're reading a novel.
Yeah.
But that's what they did.
Yes. And I think it's that in the process of getting more and more education, we unlearn to trust our gut and an instinct. And that's what I meant with the stock market, at least back in the days, was something that is easily explainable through reasoning.
Uh-huh.
And I think as a kid, if you see what it takes, it's very easy to grasp. And then as soon as you learn too much or you learn to maybe not trust different voices, then that's a moment where you screw it up and you stop trusting your instinct.
I'm about to give you the actual secret to the success of all of this. Are you ready?
Yes, please.
Okay. When you can associate people's involvement with numerical values, you have them. There's no question about it. If you can associate this person did this today, and as a result of it created this numerical outcome, you got them. And that's what you need. So it's the management of the environment where you create metrics that define your success or failure, and then tie those metrics to the outcomes of those who are part of your system. You will have them. You will have them.
Yeah.
They will work hard, because as soon as they don't, there's numerical value somewhere that shows that they didn't. You have them. I imagine one day where we're talking about community systems and community-based education, and sustainable development projects. And the projects that we'll have for the kids have to deal with the management of their communities. It's not project here. It is the management of communities. It is a community policing plan. It is a community emergency response and crisis management plan. It is a senior citizens management plan. You know, the reason I'm saying it this way is because there will be a time when I can see kids who might be considered gangsters or whatever in their community arguing with another people from another community about who takes care of their senior citizens the best, you know? And it has to happen because these kids have nothing to do. There's nothing for them. And it's in them, man. You give kids a model where they're competitive, they will work their asses off to achieve whatever you want them to achieve. You can do that. So kids from like on a corner somewhere you think will be gangsters sit there and say, well, we take care of our kids, our senior citizens better than you do in your community, is part of this whole process. And we were able to do that in the military where we talked about supervisors taking care of their people. That was the metric. And they saw it and they built in. And that's why we had more people awarded individual accomplishment awards for 4.5 years, more than any other unit in the United States Air Force. It was immediate. It was an immediate turnaround. One chief master sergeant said, in the beginning, we were F troop. 4 months later, everybody wanted to be us. That's in the book. So there's a lot of components that go with this that we're not able to talk about now. A lot of them are in the book, but they explain the details of how you put something like this together, which is what I believe I've captured over the years through a lot of trial and error. And you got to create that environment, not only for kids, but adults. And our education system does not do that for us. So we have a problem. And that's what the community-based education system is about. You know, it's about creating an environment where people can be involved and get involved in something. People who are retiring, who have still a lot to give, can come back and provide services and support, mentor kids, and create something that is from the bottom up.
Yeah.
You know? And I'm sorry to get off some time.
Please don't apologize. I think it's very inspiring. And also to hear about the parallels between the Air Force and the community-led education and the impact you have on these kids. And
just one thing for you to say, that education in America came from the military. I don't know if you know that.
I didn't
All
know.
the aspects, let's see, the actual concept of grades was in 1850s. The concept of standardized testing came out of World War I, where testing was made to allow the Army to stand up quickly for World War I, putting people in positions, and it creates a numerical value for process outcome that was adopted by the education system, where they can justify everything they do based on a conclusion at the end of a standardized test.
Yeah.
There are alternatives to that. You don't have to use standardized tests. You could use a totally different evaluation system that would alleviate standardized testing from all models in education, but they don't do it. They won't do it. And one of those models is just a growth model, longitudinal evaluation of students, which then immediately individualize the student themselves so that you can understand what they need to get to a point, not whether they reach the point at a certain time. That's how it works.
Thank you for that. And what triggered my curiosity was when you referred to these kids taking on responsibilities and becoming competitive on who is having the better, more thriving community. And what I hear is these kids have to feel safe enough in this environment, because I think if you grow up in a context where you're perceived the bad guy, the gangster, the loser, and I think from what you explained, this is the context many of these children grow up.
The adults grow up like that too, believe it or not. Go ahead.
And then how do you create the space where these humans can grow the self-confidence to actually step into this leadership role? Because that's what they are doing.
I always say it's obvious, it's the environment that you're creating. There are some concepts about student development that I'm wondering how they're understood and whether or not they're applied in a systematic way. I'll give you an example. I tell my kids about attitude, the attitude they have. But I tell them that your behavior doesn't come from your attitude comes from your behavior. I don't know if you know that. If you look at all this, all the things I've read, it's your attitude comes from your behavior. So if your behavior changes, your attitude will change. It's just something that's really interesting. And
this
it's
speaks
just
in favor of the tiny habits. So if it speaks in favor of the tiny habits. If I start to do good on a daily basis, even if it's just a minor thing, it will change my attitude towards other people because I started doing good.
Are you ready? Those 5 levels of achievement are created, designed just to do that. We're concentrating on students' habits and routines. Habits and routines. And if we can create that consistency, the attitude will change. And the 5 levels of achievement that's outlined in the book creates a criteria for them that is an involvement. Like level 1, I got it right here for a second, if I can bring it up. Every one of the levels requires a certain amount of time for the student. Level 1, and the things we had to do in terms of self-discipline, physical fitness, and performance was 18 hours a month. The student had to commit to that. Level 2 was 26 hours plus an activity. Level 3 was 32 hours plus an article and an activity. You had to write an article with the group. Level 4 was 48 hours plus an article, campaign, activity. When you get to level 3, you're probably at the level where kids are involved in school during a month time frame in most inner city kids. Level 4, you now got kids involved at community level, probably more than they are at the high school level at that time.
And basically, you're getting them off the streets and off these unhealthy routines because you basically force them to spend their time on the community work to fill the hours to get to the new next level.
And the thing is that once you get to a level, it expires in a month. So that means that level is the things you got to do to maintain it every month.
That is so sneaky.
Yeah, it's a way to get kids involved because the kids they want to do something. They have no place to go, nothing to do. I mean, they really don't. And if you understand how we can create that opportunity, we can go into a community. Let's just say 2 churches gets together and wants to create a community-based education system. And out of those 2 churches, you have 300 students. Within 30 days, we can create an entire system for those 300 students that will then last forever, where they will constantly be involved in projects along the way. We compare that, or should I say, we partner with local universities, we partner with community organizations, corporate entities, and we create opportunities where these people who are the professionals can take students through a scripted project.
And how much of this is a structured process and how much of this is facilitative work? Because I imagine we're dealing with humans, right? So there's always something happening that is outside of that. So I assume that you're working with a large group of volunteers to bring that all together.
Right. College students as well. Working with Johns Hopkins University last year. I worked with Clemson University. There are things that you can create, relationships that will define their participation in your unit. Let me just say a couple of things out there that kind of like will steer a certain way. You cannot have a university come into a community and then do something for the community, in a sense. It has to come from the community itself. It comes from that strategic planning process I talked about before. When we have things that are scripted, and let me go back to that class I taught in high school, one of the projects that I had the kids do was, my last job in the military, I was called an EPLA, Emergency Preparedness Liaison Officer, where I worked with FEMA for the state of Pennsylvania. And we had a problem in 2012 where, as you remember, there were a lot of active shooting instances. Sandy Hook was one of them as well. So when that happened, we wanted to create a plan for our school to deal with active shooting. We did that, built something together. It was a nice process to take the kids through. The Philadelphia Sheriff's Department found out about our project and asked my kids to write the active shooter response exercise for the Philadelphia Sheriff's Department, Police Department, and Fire Department for their Criminal Justice Center in downtown Philadelphia. I have pictures of my kids conducting meetings with the police and fire department in the classroom as students to my students. They organized the entire thing. They did a survey of the building itself. They did all the work. They wrote a 26-page manual for the active shooter response plan. They did not have the exercise they're supposed to. It would have been during the school year. Had they done that, my kids in their junior Air Force uniforms would have been in the hallway evaluating the police, fire, and sheriff's department by putting inputs into their phone. And then they were asked to manage the corrective actions of the active shooter exercise for the Philadelphia Police Department, Fire Department, Sheriff's Department. In addition to that, we also were going to work with other high schools who wanted to create an active shooter response plan for their school that would be culminated by an exercise by the Sheriff's Department once we brought that school up to speed. These are 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th graders.
Beautiful.
You can do this. It's a simple thing. We got in the military. I had kids 19 years old working on F-16 aircraft. We can do this, and we just don't. We just don't. So
what's in the way then? What do you think?
Well, first of all, universities don't teach alternative methods of teaching, so you don't have a body of educational professionals who understand it. There's a concept called systems theory that is elementary in most education administration's training that I've never met an education administrator who knew what systems theory was. So there's a whole lot of different aspects that need to be reinforced in education to begin to go in a different direction. In the education system itself, public education, whatever, there are so many rules and regulations that it is almost impossible within that environment to create that type of paradigm shift. So community-based education, things like service learning, which is a requirement, or just different types of community-based education models, don't have the same type of regulatory requirements around it. So you have more flexibility. But if we can quantify the outcomes of the students in community-based education, they are just as credible as being in a school from 9 in the morning to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So that's what we're creating.
I can totally see that. And I wonder whether I'm correct in boiling it down to replacing the rules and the regulations by clear processes, strong values, and roles and responsibilities.
That might be a good mission statement. But what's needed are just the actual mechanics of what you're going to do. I give an example. We have a listing of 87 professional skills that not only the students have to follow, but also the instructors, the adults have to follow the exact same 87 skill sets. And those are the things I talked about before when we said, a baseline, conduct a feasibility study, conduct a risk analysis, apply systems theory in this environment. I mean, those kind of things are part of the learning process, development process. Every one of those skill sets that I mentioned, 87 skill sets I mentioned, at least most of them, when they are assigned to someone, they become part of a list of things that have to be accomplished. The leader of that group now has access to a web base that provides a tutorial for each one of those skill sets we're asking for. So that they know what it is. Okay, what's the baseline? They go there and they find out the baseline, so. Now they take their team and they create a baseline. And then they go to the next step. And they learn how to work as teams, work as people, because we don't emphasize that with our kids. We emphasize individuality. We emphasize, how modern our society is right now. It's the individual. And these kids, as they grow older, need to work as teams. Need to be able to come together as a group of people, because that's where the power is going to be. Being able to vote people in and out of office is a consolidated effort of the community. So they have to learn how to basically work as teams, understand the same things. Imagine you go to a community, whatever that may be, and you can teach them 5 things, just 5 different things that everybody in that same community now knows. You can change the whole community after that.
Mm.
Just reference those 5 things all the time. You can move that whole community anywhere you want to go.
And then again, you can only teach these 5 things and thereby change a community if everyone understands why they want to learn these 5 things. So they must be driven by values, a vision, a purpose, what's in for them, seeing the better future, right?
So now you're going someplace else. Are you ready to go? You ready? Okay. Well, I said, first of all, you have to create a environment, and you have to create the objectives and priorities of the environment. The priority of teaching itself is the student. So our emphasis in the student development objective is self. All we want to teach the kids is themselves, who they are. And we utilize Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So utilizing that, self-actualization is the top, but all the levels below that are survival things. Physiology, food, shelter, clothing, companionship, friendship. And then the next one would be basically cooperation, team. Those type of things form the foundation. If you take that back to what I had mentioned before about creating an environment for the student where they're part of something greater than themselves, then you understand that the emphasis of the community as a whole is to collectively solve those problems at the base of that pyramid. So in its execution as a community, you're empowering the students to affect change to their environment, hence their self-worth, their selves. And then they become more involved by understanding their decisions, either being positively or negatively affecting how the community outcomes go. Yeah. And they become part of community that way. It's a very simple way I've just explained this, but it works. There's an article I read many years ago from a Harvard, actually Yale professor, and it was titled "The Game Worth Playing." And it had to do with what is it that drives us as people, to do better each day, to strive, to get up in the morning. And it is having a game worth playing. What is it that motivates you, that satisfies your requirements, to become part of something greater than yourself? And that happens through structure. And everyone feels a part of something. It has to have structure. So when we put those competencies that are common to everybody, and we create this criteria where everyone is achieving to the same levels in the same context, then you create a competitive environment. You're creating a structure by which not only they aspire to, but they also define themselves as, this is who I am now. This is who I am.
Yeah. And then what it reminds me of is, yes, it provides structure and also the transparency that you mentioned beforehand about the 5 levels of achievement. If you know what you're evaluated against and you have the structure to actually achieve it, and if it's possible, you get the sense of meaningful progress because you see, okay, if I do put some work in, if I do change my behavior, then I progress and I see the positive impact, and this motivates me.
It actually does. And to tell you, it's so easy to motivate kids. I mean, it's funny how I hear people talk about the difficulties of working with children. There are none. I mean, once you get adults, it's easy. I mean, it's just put something in front of them, define it in a way that they can understand it, and they will just gobble it up. They will just eat it up.
Yeah, because they don't take any bullshit. And I think that's what makes it difficult for adults to work with children, because they just try to put all this fluff around.
It's funny because, as I said, with the military, it was hard to have the requirement to explain things to people. But then a lot of times the things that they probably were in the military, who they embraced for years and years, suddenly become challenged. That becomes something that they were not willing to, a lot of people weren't willing to do. But I find that once you get something in place that everyone can fully understand, that takes us all as a team to a common place, and that will provide that person with what they're seeking, such as, if for us in a community-based education, we'd like to create an environment where the kids can work in the community and then get to college. And I think we're close to that.
And I wonder to what extent you can use this and apply it to corporates. And I wonder to what extent it would help teams to find more meaning at work and team performance if they were provided more structure, more clarity and transparency about roles and responsibilities, what is expected from them, and what they have to do in order to get the next promotion.
The production of the organization will go through the roof. And the way you do that is simply by creating like I told you before about the organization that saw their people working as projects in teams. God, I mean, you can just imagine all the different things. If you were a corporate president of a large corporation, think of all the ideas you have through the course of a day. And then you could instantaneously create a team to look into it. Just constantly, every time. It's like 5, 10, 20 teams a day you could create to look at it. The concept that you're asking or talking about is called systemics. It's the science itself for developing professional skill sets in an existing work environment and being able to quantify those skill sets so that rather than looking at the positions the person held, you look at the skill sets the person used to solve problems. Now it becomes part of their resume. It is an entire different science called systemics. You got to read it. So it's awesome. And
it reminds me a little bit of the holacracy reasoning, where if you have a project and then basically you have to get the buy-in by those who do have the capabilities to contribute. And if nobody wants to join you on your project, maybe it's not good enough.
Well, the part that makes it good enough in a corporate environment is because I said I want it done. You know what I mean? So somebody's going to get together and do it, if you know what I mean, in this kind of environment. But what happens is that you'll find that there are corporations where they're just duties and responsibilities that somebody has. This person has these duties and responsibilities. This person has these duties and responsibilities. And they go through them. And then a certain time comes where they have to be promoted. Which one are you going to promote? They're doing two different things. And you can't quantify what they're doing in an objective way, if you know what I mean. So what you're creating is just another environment that allows them to expand the skill sets they have. I can go to any organization right now and could think of 100 different skill sets that I'd love for everybody in the place to know and do. It would same thing as if let's just say, if you work at creating the environment correctly, you're no longer punishing people who are good. Imagine you have a job to be done, and the average person, it takes 6 hours to do it. But you got a guy who's like excellent at this job. They do it in 3. What are you supposed to do? Sit around for 3 hours? You know, there are ways that you can harness that energy that you have in your community, in your work environment or community, whatever it may be. That idea, I remember hearing a long time ago where employers were debating about the free time that their employees had, and they started, for a very short period, they started putting cameras in workplaces so they could see that people were doing what they're supposed to be doing when they're supposed to be doing it. I never understood that. I thought it was like really, really bad idea. Because first of all, the morale of people is going to go through the toilet.
Lab rats.
Yeah, right, exactly. But rather than doing that, if you were a good manager, you could create outcomes that you're seeking as an organization and then match what you need to have your people to do to achieve it. Anything above that is gravy. Now you could use all that time, resources to do all this other stuff. But it's management's laziness that creates this void in people's ability to serve who they're part of.
Yes. And I don't think that it's laziness very often. What I observe in management is that there's so much work that they, at some point, the system is working in such a stress mode that it's easier to tell people what to do because they don't see the time to slow down, take a step back, and actually look at all the craziness they're creating by not stopping. Because I think nobody wants to be a micromanager. And I think people turn into that because they fear of losing control because they're in overwhelm mode.
My thing was, it was the actual opposite. I used to tell my people that I should be able to manage this whole organization sitting on a beach somewhere. I used to tell them not overlook, not see what's going, to manage it from a beach. as it was a joke with my people, but the point I was trying to make was that if you articulate what you want in a very, very clear and concise way, you just let people go after that. You give them the tools, the criteria by which it's going to be done. You give them the resources, the team, whatever it may be, and you let them go.
And
And let them
honestly,
come back and let them fail. Let them fail.
yes, 100%. And funny enough, last week, so I'm going back to improv theater classes. So last week, the theme of the class, yes, I love it. And I think every facilitator needs to learn how to do improv theater. Maybe every teacher as well. So what we learned last week was to lead with a strong want. And what happened was, as soon as someone on stage articulated, but all I want is a sandwich, suddenly the entire scene suddenly gets more grounded and clear, and everyone knows what they have to do. And I think in real life, it's just the same. If we got to pronounce what we really want, everything would be so much easier. But then either we don't know what we want, or we don't dare to say what we want, or they're kind of hidden agendas and we don't know how to articulate, or we are not allowed to say what we want. And this creates all these problems.
When I was a consultant, I used to make a joke about I could be a consultant for a week, a month, a year. If I can condense all that into an hour, I used to tell everybody that if I spend an hour with a client, I spend 45 minutes helping that client understand what they want.
Yeah.
They usually have no idea. And what we created was a planning application that allows an organization to do the things I'm saying right now. In other words, if I have an idea, I have a planning application, I can just go through it, and suddenly I have projects for everybody to do to complete my thing, which is part of the thing for community-based education. And just if I can go back to that real quick for 1 second as a lead into this, the biggest part about community-based education or community development as a whole is you have to get the energy of the community itself. They always start off with some sort of grand meeting in some big room with a whole bunch of people from the community. You get them worked up for ideas or things that need to get done. Then the meeting ends and everybody goes home. That's not what happens in our meeting. We have the same kind of concepts of a needs analysis, figure out what the community wants, what are our strategic objectives, and then 2 days later, everybody in that room who volunteered is now tasked to do something that will make that happen. Mm. And it's all web-based. So all they have to do is then just log in with their name and email address, and then suddenly everything that they have to do is in front of them. And then we just create the teams for them to work with that. That's all it is. And they work with kids to walk through that process. Yeah. The process is laid out for them, and that's how it works.
And this all sounds so easy. So I'm curious, what remains your personal number one facilitation challenge?
I had an answer for that a while ago. I think I already spoke about it. Primarily, it was probably more when we get into meetings with communities. I find that there are a lot of people who use those times for personal things rather than for the good of the community itself as a whole. So my challenge a lot of times is to tactfully tell them I really don't care, if you know what I mean. Like they'll tell me a story about something that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. So what I do most of the time is I create for everybody a big card with a question mark on it that allows everybody to ask any question in something somebody is saying. So if somebody is saying something that has nothing to do with what we're doing, you'll see a whole audience full of question marks come up. So how does that relate to what we're talking about doing? Mm. And a couple of times like that, they stop without me having to browbeat them about, their own personal stories. And creating that type of environment where we are focused on what we're trying to do. And anybody who takes us out of that focus area needs to be drawn out and say, you're not helpful at this point. That would be, and that was a learning process more than anything else, where I kind of went through it and now I have a solution for it. But that was the biggest problem I used to have, was just hearing people's stories about things that didn't matter to me. Yeah. I mean, to me, my thing is as I'm working in community-based education or as a consultant, I define who is my customer. In a business, it's easy. A customer is the person who hired you within the company. President, a director, I'm going to make the director look good versus the whole company if the director is the one who hired me. You know what I mean? In everything with community-based education, my customers are the kids. And if I look at it that way, there's real easy to be in a room with a whole bunch of people and hear people talking and realizing from a kid's point of view, this has nothing to do with me. And there's a lot of that in education, a lot of that. So yeah, there are things that I think that we need to look at in teaching our kids that aren't even touched in education, such as those things in the systemics I talked about how we apply different skill sets that we are teaching, such as mathematics, where we're looking at creating concepts rather than exact definitions, such as what is an ecosystem of a pond versus a field, or what is osmosis, and then being able to apply that in all these different areas that you can look at that osmosis will be used for, or mathematical skill sets where you can link an understanding of this mathematics skill, this mathematics skill, this mathematics skill. Now you're capable of doing this particular professional skill, such as if you were a carpenter, you could do certain type of mathematical skills. Now you can frame a window. Those are the kind of things we're trying to create to make a real, tangible understanding of each and everything that's learned rather than just being a bunch of stuff.
I love that. And I believe that none of what you just said stops at the community-based education. When I think of town halls or all hands, how much is all of that about the end customer, the client, the real client?
Yes, exactly.
And when I look at teams and how they work, how much is actually driven by regulations, definitions, instead of processes and goals or concepts, as you say.
But most of them, too often, it's just processes that people will follow regardless of how badly they may have been designed. But they go through it through habit, which is like really bad.
Yeah.
And the hard part is challenging people to do different. It's real interesting. It's easier to get people who are new or younger to do different things than it is for older people.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Full circle to what you shared about the Air Force in the beginning.
Yeah. But the skill sets, there are hundreds of skill sets that our kids have. And the thing that we concentrate on are not academic so much, they're more cognitive. You know, we talk about ethics and leadership and morality and, you know, things that the kids can use in that team concept that we're trying to develop in the community. And there's so much to teach them that is never a shortage of new lessons to give them. You know what I mean? It's just, there's always more to teach. And it's something that's every time. And one thing I learned was really funny. I remember talking about that one sheet project paper I had that I can make, and then I can create a project with all these kids by following this one sheet. Remember I told you about that? So I designed this in like my first year teaching ROTC, and I put it out to all the kids. And it was almost like it was out of a Chevy Chase movie. They all balled the paper up and threw it at me. And I couldn't stop laughing. It was just so funny how it happened. And I realized that I did not follow the cardinal rule of introducing something new. You know what that is, right? You introduce something new, not as something for them to do. You introduce something new as a tool, as a solution to something you gave them before. So everything you give them, if you give them something new, is tied to something that they're having a problem with that they can solve.
And so they're already curious about that. So
the following year, we were getting into project-based management and all this other stuff, right? And suddenly they come out, well, how do we know what you want us to do? And then I introduced the sheet again, and they all grabbed it. Yeah, great, thank you. And that's how it works.
Yeah, that's the beauty of the problem-based learning, right? Or problem-based teaching. Yeah. From your experience, what makes a workshop fail?
Egos. I would say that actually, because it has nothing to do with leadership or anything like that. It's just usually people who have not necessarily inflated opinion of themselves, but more of what they think is right. Like you just mentioned about your things you're going through with your experts and how everybody might think they're right, you know? So what you have to create is the parameters by which you're going to define what you're seeking so that everyone's input can have numerical value of some kind, and a rational decision can be made at the end of it. That's probably the hardest part, getting people on the same page. And the hardest part, another hard part is that thing I mentioned about them being a part of something greater than themselves. That would be the hardest part, when you get somebody to say, I'm willing to go this extra mile to get to this point, regardless of whether or not I'm recognized for it later.
Yeah.
That's the part you need to get to. And that's when you're rolling. That's when you're doing well. Because everybody now wants to be a part of something greater than themselves.
Yeah, human nature.
Yeah, it really works. You know, I get frustrated because we have so much resources that we're wasting. And I wonder what the objective is when we look at our kids and how they have nothing to go to, nothing to do. You know, they're not being taught anything of value. In America, we have a high dropout rate. Few people go to college or higher education. You know, and we look at things in the world as being valuable, as being new, modern, or innovative, whatever. Sometimes it's great to figure out a better way to make a bottle of wine or furniture or something like that sometimes. So creating the skill sets it takes as a society are broad, and they involve a lot of different things that kids are not getting in their households or communities themselves, that we can do through service learning, through projects, sustainable development projects. And what we're linking our sustainable development projects locally to are the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So that if you imagine that once we get this implemented, and you'll have communities all over America sometime soon, they're all targeting the same criteria of 17 Sustainable Development Goals from the UN. And then they define what their community is based on these 17 goals. It'll be different for one community versus another. And then once they define those 17 goals for their community and then implement them, they will at some point become 100% compliant with the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN for their community. Yeah. Imagine that happening all over the country, or all over the world, where people individually within the communities are satisfying what the UN's asking for sustainable development: water purification, better security and safety, all the things that are listed, end hunger, better chances for women. All these things can be targeted for development locally. And then from that, you create ideas and concepts that can be compared. So some of this community over here is doing it. They think they did it well. The community does it better, and they adopt it because they're using the same language, the same criteria. It's just easily adopted. Okay, now we're going to do that. You have now a way where every community would have newsletters that come out monthly. And the newsletters are the repository, first of all, of the projects that are done that month, and along with an archive of the information, so that doesn't have to be recreated each time you want to do something. The criteria is the same. It's the objective that's being put out there. If you look at an objective, say, I got to do this, first thing you're going to do is say, okay, who else had to do this? You'll find what they did. You are a repository of stuff. And then you have now a pathway to do it in your own community. It grows, and it becomes something more over time. And it's owned by the kids. It's owned by the kids. So that's what we're trying to get to.
Yeah. And this, again, reminds me of what you said in the beginning. It must be owned and pushed by those who are affected.
From the bottom up. Yes, I do. I kind of go off sometimes. I start talking. I apologize if I'm going off, but,
Please don't apologize. It's a beautiful connection of, or application of, structures and methods that make sense in different contexts. So thank you so much for sharing that.
I think that I was surprised at how much kids gravitated to professionalism. Just being professional about things. I was really surprised that they were able to understand and grasp the things that you would think adults would know or do about being professional, about appearances. We talk about, social skill sets that kids have to develop. I mean, that's a really big thing for kids, is social skills. I remember I could easily, there was a guy who was 6'3", 6'4", big guy, who I would ask him to get control of a classroom, and he had a problem. And I asked another student, ninth grade, who was 4'11", to get the attention of everybody in a gym. And you saw her, she walked out in the middle of the gym and got everybody's attention. these are skill sets that people have that need to be developed, and they're coming at different levels for everybody. And these are the things that the kids need going forward. It's like, the essential things of how they define themselves, how they see themselves, are through types of gaining these types of skills.
Yeah. And for me, what you're describing, these are facilitation skills. These are leadership skills. It's like how to get the attention of a group without shouting at them. It's facilitation, right? It's presence. It's leading with a strong presence, with a strong purpose, being in service of the group, and they will sense it.
I don't think you ever have to yell at anybody. I never did. If you can maintain what you want as an objective and just correct people as they stray off of the objective, that's all you really need to do. So it becomes a different environment where, like for the military environment I talked about before, I never heard anybody yell at anybody, which was like rare, if you know what I mean. You'll find that in an environment with the kids in junior ROTC program, a lot of what we were doing was centered around them self-policing themselves, where if a student was having a problem, either coming in late for school or not dressed well or something you could tell was off, there was a checklist for how the leader of that classroom would then interact with that person to find out what's wrong. If he's having a problem with lessons in the classroom, there was a person that would follow that student every time they left a classroom. There's a student coming behind them asking the teacher what happened. So they become self-correcting in its process of implementation. And you have to create that synergy of all the things that are happening to create the loops you need to sustain it. It's like the concept of management is no process begins or ends in isolation. If you just remember that alone, you can develop any type of environment, because as soon as someone says, we're going to do this, okay, I say, well, explain to me in detail all the things you're going to do to get to that beginning point of that. Such as, we're going to do training of this way. Okay, how are you going to identify the people who need training? How are you going to write the lesson plan? How are you going to do this? And then the lesson program starts. And then once the program is done, I then ask them other questions. So what happens now? Where do I go after this? Does it end there? Because if it ends there and there's nothing that follows along, you just diminish the value of what you taught them. They can't use it. So what does it go as a value to them? And when you want to create that value, you create a numeric value. That's all you have to do. Say, okay, this has created this particular step to go now to this next level or whatever. And that's how you create the relationship within the environment that allows people to value what they're going through. Otherwise, they just say it's another program. Well, okay, we're going to do this now. And then we do it and it ends. And then they just go off and do something else. And it doesn't mean anything to them. The strangest thing that happened when I was teaching was I gave my kids a lesson in April and May. And they went through, it was a very interesting lesson. And then we went to something else. The school ended. When the school year began the next year, I brought out that lesson because the next lesson was where that started. Where that lesson ended, where the next lesson started. It blew their mind. The kids, it blew their mind. Yeah. And they treated everything after that differently.
Yes.
Because it has a value now that they didn't have before. So
yeah.
Well, got a lot of editing to do in this one.
And a life value. No, I think that's true for everyone. Thank you so much for your generous sharing.
I really appreciate it. I was looking forward to it. I would like to send you a website address that you can post with what you're doing so that I'm open to people contacting me if they're interested in creating some sort of community-based education system.
Yes, and we will put your contact details or contact form website in the show notes.
Fantastic. That's exactly what I'm hoping you do. Yeah, I'll email that to you. I'll scale everything up and email it to you so you can kind of like figure out what you want to do with it. But because it's web-based, I can do this virtually to anybody in any community.
Beautiful.
So I'm trying to create it so that we can have a network throughout this country and anywhere of experiences of kids. So let's just say a kid who reaches level 4 and can now travel to anywhere in the country, reach level 5, and anywhere in the world. And then having opportunities for that kid to travel to do something someplace else. Those kind of things are what we're trying to create.
Beautiful. And I'll put all the information in the show notes.
Okay. And I look at you now as a resource, so I may be emailing you just to say hello sometime and to give feedback on things and kind of keep you abreast of what we're trying to do and figure out how we can do it better. If that's all right.
I'd appreciate that.
I love it. I love it.
Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you for staying tuned and for listening until the very end. I hope that you found the inspiration and the wisdom that you are looking for. And I hope that you will subscribe to the show so that you never miss any of the interviews with another inspiring facilitator from across the world. I'm devoted to continue this podcast and to deliver weekly an episode that maintains the quality that you expect and you deserve. And if you would like to help me to maintain this quality and to keep the podcast free, please help us. Visit workshops.work/support to make a small donation to keep the podcast free. Thank you so much. I hope to be in your ears next week.